Do you remember this champion?
Arcane Shift gets out just in time, and the spear nearly takes down Def. Turning around, Faker coming in with the spear's heart. Has to go on the run, and Faker's gonna chase him down! Oh, meets the spear. He rode that spear into that kill onto Heart.
The zone caught in Def there. They
Oh,
aren't.
I'd love to see what the damage on the champions after this game is gonna be from Faker. Insane.
That is some of the most accurate Nidalee work that I have ever seen done.
She was a spear-chucking poke mage assassin, who at the time felt terrible to play against. Arguably, she was one of the most broken champions in history, because nothing about this champion was fun to play against. Nid was in line for a rework, and that's exactly what she got. On patch 4.10, everything that was good about her in a solo lane as a poke mage was changed, and eventually, this rework would become the reason she would turn into a jungler. Her kit is definitely healthier now, but it's one of those things that they were never really able to get right, because of course she's still been played and nerfed a bunch in the jungle role as well. And while Nidalee received her rework on that patch, on the very same patch, something else followed suit with her. There would be something added to the game, an item, that would go through many different balance changes throughout the years. It was seen as a troll item at first. It was never really being built by any supports. It would go through buff after buff after buff, until finally it was broken. Many players who played back in Season 4 would never predict that this single change, this single item, this one little lamp, would change the scope of League of Legends forever. Ardent upon its release was not good at all. Most supports back then never built it, because typical support item builds back then were Sightstone, when you still had to build one, then completing the support item such as Face of the Mountain, and then if you had the gold, you would either build Locket, Athene's, Mikhail's, or honestly just tank stuff such as a Randuin's or a Banshee's Veil. They tried for several seasons to make the item good, but to no luck. For supports, they really needed Sightstone. Even though the item wasn't that expensive, it was not just core, but a guarantee. This was mostly a gold tax that didn't allow supports to reach full items very often because of the sync that was required. On top of that, you could also upgrade your trinket at level 9 for 250 gold, which was also a guarantee that supports would do, adding more things to the list of what they would have to buy. Because of these two things that were a must purchase, building situational support items, which Ardent Censer was never going to happen.
So when most people see the new item Ardent Censer, they don't really focus on the stats that Ardent Censer gives. Gives some ability power, some mana regen, and some cooldown reduction. Rather, they don't see what Ardent Censer should have to be a good support item. But the main problem with this item is that it's very expensive for a passive that is kind of lacking when you compare it to other things in the game.
Supports were only able to buy the single most OP support items in the game, which were things like Locket. But on patch 5.22, Riot would remove those upgraded trinkets, adding 250 gold back into the pockets of the support's budget. On the same patch, they also added Sightstone to the build path of the support items, allowing for an extra item slot assuming the support got to 6 items. So if you couple the changes to the wards with all of the Ardent Censer buffs, which there were a lot of, you start to understand what happened here. On patch 4.12, the item was buffed only a month after its release, increasing the AP. On patch 5.10, it gave it a simple buff that changed around a couple of things. On patch 6.13, it was given a massive buff, helping out in many different ways. On patch 6.22, this buff added the healing effect to the item, giving it an entirely new OP mechanic. And after all of these changes, we finally approach the tipping point for Ardent Censer. The real story on why Ardent became so broken starts at the very beginning of Season 7, on patch 7.2. In a lot of cases, not just League of Legends or games, but also in life, What can make something really good is that its own shine is too bright. And when one thing shines so bright, it sometimes doesn't allow for light to come from other sources, even if those other sources are also quite bright. Redemption was the key go-to support item, and it was extremely overtuned. It had everything that you needed, along with more noticeable agency. Agency is just when you feel like you have an outcome on the game. Supports had a lot more agency with Redemption due to the active being so powerful, and of course, so visual. When used well, it could completely change the course of a game. Obviously, there are levels to things, and Redemption definitely needed a nerf and shouldn't have been so strong. But Riot's crucial mistake would eventually come to fruition, which was on that patch. This was one of the biggest mistakes in their history, and I believe is one of their biggest flaws when it comes to balancing, because Ardent Censer was extremely overcorrected. On the same patch, Redemption was nerfed and Ardent was buffed. By all means, this was an overcorrection. It didn't need a buff, due to the fact that nerfing Redemption in turn would mean that more people will buy and most importantly try out Ardent Censer. It's a game about cost and trade-off, and when one option becomes worse, it means that another option becomes more valuable. After this buff, what didn't this item do? It empowered shields and heals while also giving the support ability power and CDR. It gave movement speed, it gave your team attack speed and healing, and on-hit damage, and mana regen. On this fateful patch, we all became slaves to the Ardent meta. The item rose very quickly to becoming the best support item in the game, far better than any other option. Sound familiar? It also just wasn't the best support item in the game, but quite literally one of the best items in the history of League. The breakdown of the gold value that this item brought for your team was absolutely nuts. Lulu, Janna, Sona, and Soraka were the clear benefactors here, with Lulu and Janna flying high above every other champion in the game. There were nightmare tales at the time, with Janna topping the win rate charts, sometimes nearly 60%. One thing to keep in mind is that since those days, Janna and Lulu have also been directly nerfed and changed to make their shields less oppressive. You're not just talking about giving the current Janna and Lulu the old Ardent, it's also the old Janna and old Lulu. On top of that, there was an ADC trend at the time that made the strategy even more effective, which was the Relic Shield strategy. On 7.9, Riot wanted to introduce something new to the support class, something to make them want to be more active and achieve something meaningful. This came with a new effect called quests. Quests were just what the support had to do in order to get their wards, and when reaching a certain amount of gold earned from the quest, your support item gets upgraded and gives you the wards. For the Spell Thieves line, your spells and basic attacks started dealing a little bit more damage and gave you a mini Phase Rush or Storm Raider Surge, allowing mage supports to actually kite around and gain movement speed. For the Relic line, it was a real doozy. It gave a permanent shield that regenerated out of combat. This meant that building it basically gave the ADC a permanent Bloodthirster shield. ADC started taking this so assassins couldn't kill them as easily. The item also gave you a little bit of health, and the best part is that it funneled more gold into the support, since the Relic Shield procs share gold with them, so the support could also get their Ardent Censer even faster. The laning phase down bottom lane with the constant heals and shields from the relics, sometimes even double relic shields, became so bad that both the bottom laners just quit trying to lane, and the support said, you know what, I only care about Ardent, and it was meta for the supports to take gold generation runes, not even worrying about health or defensive stats or AP. Who needs it? Just get Ardent.
Basically means that you can just invest more gold into your support. Remember, Janna last game had like an 800 gold lead on the enemy support.
It's a little silly.
It's going to be even more significant when you're having all this investment. And the barrier heal is just to give even more peel for the Cogmore.
Trying to be objective about it, obviously the bottom laners felt so powerful during this meta. I'm not really an ADC player or an ADC main, but I know that a lot of ADCs and a lot of supports really like this meta, for obvious reasons. ADCs such as Xayah, Tristana, Varus, and Kog'Maw were the clear above the rest cut caliber S-tier ADCs that could hyper carry with their support every single game, and the game was kind of brought to a 2v5 perspective. Which bot lane could outperform the other? Ardent supports and shielding supports became so valuable and easy to climb with, and they were easily one of the most important players on the team, even if it was by all means very unfair. For more than a month leading up to Worlds, the Ardent Censer meta was at full force. It definitely wasn't some secret or up-and-coming strategy going into Worlds. Plenty upon plenty of players were constantly complaining about the meta and the item. It was clearly the meta, and that's what I want you to understand. Forum post after Reddit post after internet complaints were flooding Riot's inbox. The item needed nerfed. Please, just nerf Ardent. I'm not about to watch AFK Janna, AFK Lulu every game at the most important tournament of the year. Please stop with this nonsense. However, there was no nerf. Patch after patch, change after change, nothing to the meta. Relic Shield ADCs, Ardent Censer, 2 players versus the world. ADC pentakill every game, while Janna stands there and spams thumbs up. Why? Why did Riot do that? Are they blind to the forums? Are they blind to Reddit? Do they not care at all? Well, I try to be objective as I can in my videos, and trying to see both sides of the equation. Years removed from Season 7 Worlds, in hindsight, yes, the item should have been nerfed. Relic Shield should have been changed without question in my mind. But at the time, Riot had a legitimate and real argument for not changing the item. They didn't want history to repeat itself, because 2 years earlier, they already made a massive mistake.
Coming through, a double kill for Balls, a triple kill for Balls. Holy cow! Kill for Balls! Holy cow!
Riot was heavily criticized for completely ruining Worlds for Season 5, with the massive changes that they implemented just weeks before the tournament started. They did these huge reworks and item changes pretty much days before the pros were expected to play on stage, with the Juggernaut rework causing Mordekaiser, Darius, and Skarner to be absolutely disgusting. Mordekaiser was 100% picked or banned as a bottom lane carry. Gangplank just received his rework as well and was also disgusting and had extreme priority. Fiora also had her rework and was impossible to 1v1 and carried every game from the top lane. There were these massive meta-defining changes that the pros had very little time to practice with. It's dangerous to make such sweeping changes before a big tournament due to all of the unknowns and the parity. Obviously, these champions were so overpowered and impossible to counter, but Riot didn't even have time to nerf Mordekaiser because he literally just came out. This went down as probably the worst Worlds ever, and Riot didn't want to screw the pros all over again. So, Worlds came, and it was a clown show.
We do get Ardent Censer here from RNG. Ardent Censer meta. And still have the Ardent Censer
around the shields, Ardent Censer.
But because when you have Ardent Censer supports Lulu, Janna, Ardent Censer support. To rush the Ardent Censer as fast as possible.
Rushing Ardent Censer on the support.
What item of the Ardent Censer comes first?
They have Ardent Censer.
The Ardent Censer race. Ardent Censer race.
Interesting thing about the meta coming into Worlds.
The meta was very clear. Rush Ardent, play for the win. Lulu and Janna sat atop the priority list, and when they were banned, teams often found another way to fit Ardent into their comp, with some weird picks sometimes like Ivern. The best teams would abuse the new meta very well, and when Samsung would eventually 3-0 SKT, Crown played his point-and-click Malzahar every game, and Ruler showed the world how good his Xayah was with an Ardent on his back. Worlds ended, and there were no changes, no adaptation from players at all. Ardent the whole way. Except for one series. One iconic series that everyone remembers as one of the craziest examples of counterpicks in League of Legends history. The Misfits were a team from Europe who were clearly outmatched in this matchup versus SK Telecom, who were the defending world champions. The analyst desk predicted a 3-0 versus the Misfits. They weren't a bad team. They had a solid roster with Power of Evil, Han Sama, and Maxlore, but they were up against SKT. After game 1 went pretty much as expected, they decided to whip out something different for game 2. They said, screw the meta. We're not playing in Ardent support. We are going to lock in something better.
TP down, you can get these big Mega Gnar ults that could perhaps turn around a game, and I think that's what they're looking for, and it is going to be the Karma mid, as I had called out earlier.
Misfits away from National here, but instantly you see the reaction. It's turn, kill Faker, and when he thinks he's safe, Ignar gets onto him. I love this play here first from Faker to stop the Baron from going down, and he thinks he's safe now. And then Ignar makes the big play.
This is so nice there from Ignar, knowing he needs to be able to get that, and Faker, shake it off, unhappy with the results.
Welcome to the EULCS, baby!
Ignar's Blitzcrank was a huge reason they were able to win Game 2. He shocked the world and showed just how good his Blitz mechanics could be, hitting every single crucial hook, especially ones onto Faker's Corki. The series was evened up at 1-1 in Game 2. For Game 3, we got something even better.
Ready for this game.
And I'm always going to give Faker the credit that he can play any champion in the game. And despite the fact that there are multiple support bans on the playmakers, Morgana is still available.
Yes.
So they're targeting more Ignar as a player rather than actually, the support champion. Oh my God, the Leona, this makes so much sense. Going into Lulu, we talk about champions that can pick on Lulu in the early game. We talked about Thresh, we talked about Blitz, we did not talk about the Leona.
Ah, shame on us!
This is a pick. I mean, this is...
Leona and Blitzcrank and other engaging tank supports can, in theory, constantly oppress the scaling ADCs and Enchanter supports. Throughout League's history, this is exactly what you would pick into these Enchanters. Ignar would choose his Leona and show exactly why he would pick it. Despite the start to the series being incredible for Misfits, they would end up losing in 5 games to the Korean favorites. But regardless of the outcome, this level of innovation and trust in your champion would be monumental for 2017 Worlds. It was the talk of the tournament, and proved that no matter what the meta is, you can always find a way to counter it. Well, actually that's not true, because in the first game Power of Evil picked Karma mid and rushed Ardent, and in the second game Maxlore picked Iron jungle and rushed Ardent, so they still found a way to get the OP item in their team comp, they just picked a different support. Nowadays, Ardent and Ardent supports are a shadow of their former selves. Even if in the current meta they are still very strong, nothing will compare to how good Janna was back then. It's possible that Riot lost a lot of their girl player base and it's been decreased ever since Ardent was nerfed. But in turn, Riot learned a crucial lesson about overcorrection. League is a game that should allow for creativity, innovation, and skill expression, which is something that the Ardent meta completely lacked. You had a guaranteed strong strategy, a guaranteed build path, with supports that also weren't that hard to play. It simply removed too many weaknesses and added a very clear win condition. There wasn't much room for innovation. Hopefully, as games and seasons move on, we never have to deal with bot lane 2v8s ever again. But for now, it's just gonna be a jungle diff. Anyway, thanks for watching.
Winds southerly at about 15 with gusts of 25 miles an hour.